Managing Developers with Glenn Burnside.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast, deliver quality, and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software architecture company that empowers .NET teams to be highly effective and self-sufficient, able to deliver world-class results through its ClearMeasure Way for Effective Software Teams methodology. Quick announcement, the architect forums are still going strong. Signups for the next session are up. And if you lead a software team or are looking to collaborate with peer architect leaders, then you can sign up at the link in the show notes. This is for people who are running development teams and maybe you don't have a peer at your organization that you can bounce ideas off of. We get together, development team leaders from all kinds of companies and have some pretty interesting conversations. And for those of you who are looking for Programming with Palermo, my video podcast, just go ahead and search in any of the podcast directories and you'll be able to find it. Now, my guest today on the show is Glenn Burnside. Glenn Burnside is a principal engineer at Skimmer, and for 11 years, he was the executive vice president at Headspring until they were acquired by Accenture. And before that, he held a number of development management positions as well as leadership roles in the Boy Scouts and other community organizations. Glenn also holds an Executive MBA from Quantic School of Business and a computer engineering degree from Texas A&amp University, where he held leadership positions in the Corps of Cadets Company B1. And you can find more about Glenn at glennburnside.com. Glenn, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Jeffrey. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. For those without the context, Glenn and I worked together way back when at Headspring for a little bit. And so
That's right.
We're kind of catching up. And he's been managing developers quite a bit before I ever managed my first developer. And, I remember learning some stuff from you. But before we kind of get into that topic, can you share with the listeners maybe some high points? What steered you? You started out, computer engineering, and that was your trade. But what were the things along the way where you said, you know what? I know other people just want to code all day, but I feel like I need to move into this leadership realm as opposed to just being a coder all day, and then you never look back.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. Long time ago, probably 20 plus years ago, I got approached by my manager at the time. This was when I was working at National Instruments, and asked me, would I consider taking on the management role for the team that I was currently a part of? And I actually told her, I said, if you make me the manager of this group, I'm going to quit. Because I told her, I said, I have a lifetime career objective to never be the person that has to go around and say, hey, I really need you to fill out your timesheet. And of course, the irony of that, of course, is that, like when we worked together at Headspring, and for all of the, 12 plus years that I was in consulting as an operations leader there, one of the primary things I had to do on a near daily basis was walk around the floor and say, hey, I really need you to fill out your timesheet. Yeah. It came back to bite me eventually. But, at that point in my career, I think I was probably like a lot of young software developers that, I got into computers because I really liked the results of putting my hands on the keyboard, getting things done, watching something come to life. And, the computers are all ones and zeros. And so they're very predictable and people are not. And so, early on in my career, I was convinced that management was for those people who maybe thought they were cut out to be a software developer, but really couldn't hack it. And so they had to settle for a management role. That was my viewpoint for a long time. And somewhere, after probably a a decade, longer than it should have taken, frankly. It came to, I started to realize that the point of a good manager was to clear the way and to support the efforts of their team. It wasn't to audit them or monitor them or supervise them. And I realized I was, without really meaning to, without necessarily being a conscious effort, more and more of my time was going to the support and the mentoring and the coaching of the people around me on my teams. And I realized that what I was doing was team and developer management, but not necessarily with an explicit title attached to it at that time, But it was this gradual process of realizing that, there's a lot of value in somebody being a little bit out ahead of the team, being able to help, buffer them from organizational complexities that could take them off course, being able to invest in them explicitly in their technical skills and their professional development skills, and just being available to help make their life easier on a daily basis so that they could focus on getting the job done. And I think I had this aha moment at some point, I think when I was working at Dell, where I realized, I've only got so many keystrokes left in my fingertips in my life, and I can either spend that time and that attention on my output as an individual, or I can start deliberately seeking out opportunities to multiply that effort by bringing more people into the activity, and in the pursuit of whatever objectives we were at that given company. And that really led me into an excitement about the idea of software team management that up until then, it had all been about an apprehension.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm guessing that some of the listeners on this podcast are probably thinking for themselves, trying to judge. Maybe they just took that step and they're like, okay, what do I do next? Or maybe they're thinking, should I take that step? Because our industry has grown so fast that so many companies maybe got into custom software. They hired 1, 2, 3, however many developers, but they did it from the bottom up and didn't really think, oh, well, we need somebody who can actually manage these. And maybe, oh, guess what? The VP of operations at this manufacturing company now needs to manage the developers or whatnot. Hey, so what do you guys need? You need some tools? Okay, what else? Some pizza? Okay. As opposed to knowing really how to dig in. So let's go from maybe the front of the start team building. If you're thinking about this, how do you choose who to hire? What's your thought process? How do you add somebody to the team, whether it's building the team from scratch or just adding somebody, that whole chain of figuring out who you want to add to a team?
Right. Absolutely. There's a lot of different ways to approach this. And I think that you can fall, to either extreme if you're not careful of, on the one side, and I think this is really common in our industry, we get really indexed on technical skills and specific framework experience as being the primary criteria to bring somebody onto the team. So if I'm trying to hire a senior engineer, it's really easy to go out and look and say, okay, I'm going to need someone who's got 10 plus years .NET experience. I want them to have, experience on .NET Core. I want them to know entity framework. I want them to know, structure map, because that's what we're using for dependency injection. And if they don't match all that criteria, we don't even bother talking to them, right? And so I think that's one approach that I think you can end up having somebody that checks all the boxes of knowing what you want them to know, but not necessarily being able to execute and integrate the way that you want them to. And on the flip side of that, I think that, and I've seen hiring approaches where we put such an emphasis on quote unquote culture fit that we can end up leaving out a validation of technical skills. And so I try to find a middle ground in there where I'm a big believer. I love Patrick Lencioni's stuff, and so he has a book called The Ideal Team Player, which I really love. And what it ultimately comes down to is, I'm looking for people who are humble, hungry, and smart. And if you can find someone who's humble, hungry, and smart, and knows enough of what you need them to know to get in and get started, then the odds are good that whatever technical gap is there is going to be quickly filled, because you've brought somebody in who's already got a demonstrated capacity for curiosity and learning, which is, in our industry, I think is the most critical skill that you're looking for, is how quickly can you learn new skills, because everything changes so fast. Yeah. And, if you've got, if you've got tons of great experience on yesterday's framework, that isn't really helpful. So, that's, I think, ultimately what I try to look for is that blend of really great traits that are going to make somebody curious, coachable, excited about what they're doing every day, and has a demonstrated ability to deliver on the technical side of what we do in software development. And I think it's important that you structure your interview process so that you're covering all of those bases explicitly, and not just sort of hoping that comes through in a series of conversations. And so, I've always been a big believer in an interview process that starts with basic validation of skill alignment, background experience, all those sort of things. A gatekeeping check that's typically done by in the HR team or from your recruiter. That's not necessarily inside the engineering team. And then a very explicit technical competency evaluation and a very explicit character and behavioral assessment as well. And really, depending on the role, is whatever order you need to put them in order to get the no's figured out as quickly as possible, so you can get to the yeses without spending any more time than you need to do it.
Well, so many of the big companies have an established way to do that, and you can go on YouTube and you can see people talking about the Google interview and how it was for them, and I mean, in detail and whatnot. How do you like to go about validating it? I'm hearing a listener say somewhere, "Yeah, I have the same goal, but how do I do that?"
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I've always tried to build into that team building process is I'm looking for demonstrated ability or demonstrated actions from their prior history. And so the number one point is, I don't ever ask anybody a hypothetical question of how they would do something or how they would respond in a certain circumstance, because everybody knows the hypothetical answers. Everybody knows the textbook answers. How would you deal with an employee who was not meeting expectations? Like, everybody knows how you're supposed to respond to that. Everybody knows how you're supposed to scale a system, right? What I look for is, tell me about a time when you were faced with a challenging problem. And then I start diving into that, so it's that standard like STARR behavioral assessment, right? Situation, task, action, resolution. Take the, so they can take you through the whole prior activity. And I usually tack a second R on the end of that. So it's like a pirate star, it's STARR. And that's the retrospective. And then I ask them, looking back at it now, what would you have done differently in that situation? And that is something that really helps me to understand, is this somebody who's introspective and is taking the time to assess what they've done and learn from it for the next time? The other thing that I always have done whenever I can in the interviewing process is, when I have a technical component, it's never on a whiteboard. It's never a chalkboard discussion about software design, because that's not how we write software. I actually give them a problem to solve and ask them to solve it. And then we talk through what they came up with. And then if we, if time allows and if it's possible, then we may even iterate on it some, because I want to see how they respond to changing requirements over time. And you might remember this all the way back from when we were together at Headspring, but we had a really simple, programming assignment that, the first iteration of it, you could probably, if you knew what you were doing, you could probably bang it out in about 3 minutes, and it was about 5 lines of code long. But then we would iterate on it. We would keep adding requirements to it. And so, you could fill up an hour or more of somebody just responding to handling changes in requirements, and then, and then watching them do it, pairing with them, seeing it on the screen. And it was amazing. That little tiny assignment was so valuable. Number one, because if you couldn't do it, well, then we're done.
You're done. Yeah, save time.
We're done. That's an easy and again, we're not talking about something deep or esoteric or complicated. We're talking about really basic algorithmic development that anybody should be able to do, whether you're front end dev, back end dev. We had somebody one time that did it at school. Yeah. And then by moving through it, a lot of times there were cases where there were some really easy pitfalls to fall into that, would run into like memory consumption issues or time complexity issues. And then we could follow up on that and ask them to probe and inspect. And you could kind of see, how do they solve the next part of that? How do they deal with the problems they're encountering in it? How do they reason about what went wrong, right? Like, hey, you wrote this program in a way where it's crashing now. You're literally getting an out of memory exception. What's going on? And you can kind of see, okay, do they sit there and kind of like make up a story for you about it? Or do they start, do they open up the debugger? Do they start thinking through and because of how they understand computers work, to understand like that's what's actually happening here, and start to think about what they can do about it. So, that to me is something that's missing in a lot of interview processes, because again, it's, if you're at the whiteboard or you're doing a Q&A like this about a technical topic, it gets hypothetical really quickly, and it doesn't really have anything to do with the real world of how we work on a daily basis. And so demonstrated work and demonstrated behavior from past experience, to me, are a critical piece of determining if someone's going to be a great fit on the team or not.
Yeah, I like that. Like an audition, if you're hiring a singer or a juggler, you would never do the evaluation just sitting across the desk and talking about that activity.
That's right. And yeah, I always use this analogy with my recruiting teams of, there's people who are in the fan club and there's people who are in the band. And we're auditioning for members of the band. Yeah. And the trick is, is at first glance, the fan club members and the band members, they all know the same things, but not everybody can pick up that instrument and play. And so that's what we're looking for.
Yeah. And a lot of musicians can play a song that they've practiced, but you're looking for the people who can jam on the spot with no prep.
Yes, who are comfortable coming in and improvising with you and exploring with you. Exactly.
Yeah.
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery. ClearMeasure is also happy to be a sponsor of the video podcast, Programming with Palermo. Watch, learn, and program alongside Chief Architect Jeffrey Palermo. Videos are added weekly and available on syndicated locations supporting video podcast or by visiting palermo.network. Tune in today.
I wanted to add some encouragement to maybe the younger developers out there, because you mentioned that you've eliminated so many people that just didn't even have the basic technical chops to even set foot in the job, versus Excel and look for the other things. I want to get your take on this. It seems like there's a good number of younger developers who might not have as strong of a outward personality, but they've already amassed amazing programming skills, and they just don't know how they stack up across peers, and they just lack some confidence. Is your perception similar, or how has it stacked up for you?
Yeah, and I've seen that play out in both directions at different times in my career. I've seen those young, hungry, curious people who are 2-3 years into their professional journey, and I mean, it's like they've been at the gym like every day their whole life. I mean, they're just, rock solid, and really don't realize how good they are.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've also seen, I've also had a lot of potential candidates and people who've had, in 20 years in the industry, they've had 1 year of experience 20 times,
over and over and over again,
over and over and over again. And, and then they're really shocked when it doesn't work out for them during an interview process. And so I think one of the, the most valuable things you can do is get some outside eyes on yourself and your abilities from outside your current company. One of the things that was really great working in consulting, and one of the reasons why I used to tell us, people who are just graduating, just getting into the industry, to really think about that as an initial career step is, you go into your first job, you go into a product company, you go into a large IT organization, and you learn a whole lot about how that company works and operates.
Mm-hmm.
And you learn a lot about what that ecosystem of software developers is like. You go into consulting, you're going to be in your first year, 2 years on the job. You might be in 5, 8, 9 engagements, and you're going to see how, a dozen different companies work and operate. And you're going to see a dozen different software engineering teams and what their talent is like and what their capabilities are like and how they get things done. And, the more data points you have to draw from, the better you're going to have an understanding of where you fit kind of on that spectrum, and a better sense overall of what the industry as a whole is really like, versus just that like one line of experience. And so, so number one, like I say, people don't always think about this, but going into consulting, going into some kind of a consulting group, great place to get started, that a lot of folks rule out because they assume it's only for the really senior people to go and do.
Or traveling on a plane all day long.
Or traveling on a plane all the time and all that. And of course, these days,
Yeah.
That's hardly ever the case anymore. If you don't necessarily have that opportunity, then take advantage of other opportunities. Get out there to the local user groups, get out there to the local communities, go find an open source project to be a part of, to be a contributor to, find some mentors from outside of your current place of employment and, take advantage of them to help you understand, where are my blind spots that I don't see, where I need to maybe shore up some weaknesses, and also to help be able to recognize and understand, like, where are my strengths? Because you just may not see it.
Yeah. So you talked a lot about putting the right people on your team, putting the most strong people you can, like just over the top, high competency. And so I want to know your thoughts on the flip side, which is, okay, now you've packed your team with the best people who probably have the most options to go somewhere else. What are some intentional things that you do to make them want to stay for any significant period of time, as opposed to, I've been doing the same thing for a long time, and now I want to, what do you do for that?
One of the most important things to give anybody is a vision of a path forward. And so the best thing that you can do is to help them be able to see, what does their next set of roles, like responsibilities, what does their next role look like within the current organization? And then the reality is that for that to happen, it helps if the company is growing. It's very hard to structure career paths for people in a stagnant organization or a company that's kind of like reached its steady state position in the industry, whatever that is, you know, or if the, owners of the company or the leaders in the company are just sort of happy with the scope of what they're doing right now, that can be really tough to craft a path for somebody. And you have to be prepared if that's the environment you're in. just recognize that that means you're probably going to have more turnover than you wish you had. So that's challenge number one. It's everything is easier when there's growth, because growth affords opportunity for people to take on new challenges, new responsibilities, whatever that is for them. Coupled with that, and I think equally important, is to keep everybody aimed at a higher order understanding of the mission. So if you, as a manager, if you let your team think of themselves as hired guns, mercenaries who are just here to trade their talent for a paycheck,
code monkeys, talented code monkeys, highly skilled code monkeys with amazing acrobatic capabilities. If you let them view themselves as, I'm here to trade my time and my talent for dollars, and I'll be here as long as that trade is the best trade I can get. And the minute somebody gives me a better trade, I'm out of here. Like, you've missed an opportunity there, and you really need to spend time when you're talking with your team, when you're doing your one-on-ones, when you're having team meetings, like helping them to set their eyes on a larger vision, which means that you've got to be able to articulate that, right? So, from recent experience, like where I am right now, the company I'm at is called Skimmer. We make software for the pool servicing industry. And that's really niche market, a very specific targeted vertical. And, it's kind of easy to look at it and go, oh yeah, it's just like, there's a mobile app, there's a web app. It's, there's nothing sexy going on. Like, there's not a whole lot of like machine learning to, the practice of scheduling pool service and maintenance and repair and making sure it happens on time. But, if I look at it at a higher level, right, I've got 6,000 plus companies that are running their business on our platform, which means that we've got 6,000 small and medium businesses all across America that are able to be successful and are able to grow their business and are able to create a life for themselves and their families and for their employees that they wouldn't necessarily be able to otherwise. And so, I get up in the morning and I go to work and I'm excited because I'm helping ensure the American dream for thousands of people all across the United States. Like, that's really exciting. That's a noble mission that's worth pursuing. And the fact that I happen to get to do it with software is all the better, because that's what I'm good at. And so, people will stay longer than they would otherwise if they believe that they're part of a noble mission. So if you can help them see where they're aimed to in the longer term as being something that's worth doing, worth contributing to, and you can help them see themselves in that story for a longer period of time, then they're going to stay with you for a longer time than they probably would otherwise. Yeah, that's a good point. Now, you've been managing developers for a long time at this point.
Yes.
A long, no, I'm just kidding. But with the growth of our industry, everybody talks about being short on developers, but we are really short on competent development managers of all flavors. It's just like, it's the next order problem, right? Tons of developers getting in the industry. Who's going to manage them? So we have people managing developers right now just because somebody's got to try to do that job. And you come from a computer programming initial, education and background and coding jobs, and then moving into managing of programmers. So that there are plenty of managers out there who haven't personally done programming, but they find themselves having to manage programmers. Any thoughts for them to just be able to do a good job, given that, hey, that's their situation right now?
Yeah, that is a tough one. I think that anytime you're in a position of leading a group of people who are skilled at what they do, it's incumbent on you to not necessarily, be as good at it as they are. But it is incumbent on you to understand the craft of what they do, and to be able to know what good looks like, and to be able to know what not good looks like, and to be able to offer advice to those people on how to improve and how to, grow and develop. And again, it's, I overuse the analogy of a sports team, but, coaches, you ever look at like a football coach or a basketball coach over on the sideline, like they don't look like they can just go get out on the field and play with all the players, right? Like they're not in that shape. Right. They're not in that conditioning. They don't have, not going to happen, right? But they know the game.
Yeah.
They know the game. They have a love for the game. They have a respect for the game. They have a respect for the talent. And what they are really good at is helping the talent get better, is knowing what a training program looks like for them to be effective as individual athletes and as a team.
Mm-hmm.
So, they don't have to, you don't have to be the greatest football player of all times to be a really great football coach. But what you do have to have is you have to have respect for the game. You have to have respect for the players, and you have to be able to assess the needs of the team to be successful. So if you find yourself in the position of managing a software group, a software team, where you're going to get yourself into trouble really fast is if you try to treat this as strictly the management of personnel, the supervision of personnel who are going to self-direct themselves to actually do the actual work, and you don't have to worry about that. You need to know what good looks like.
Yeah.
You need to know what not good looks like, and you need to be able to help coach people through that gap when it's present. And so to do that, you've got to have enough background to be able to, to have that awareness. And so if you're literally in a position of I'm managing a software team, and I've never cracked open a text editor before. Well, I mean, it might be a good idea to go look up one of the, introductory courses that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a ton of them, and do a little homework, and get some practice in, get some reps in, so that you can at least have some passing conversation with everybody about what they're actually working on.
The coach needs to at least know that there's only supposed to be one ball on the field at a time.
Right. It's fundamentals, right? Fundamentals. And if that's really hard for you, or if it's just look, this just doesn't work for me, then, you're going to have to play to the strengths you do have. And so assumedly, if you're in a kind of a position like that, then you've got some background in management and leadership. Hopefully you're humble enough to be able to admit to the rest of the team, look, what y'all do for a living is beyond my ken and my reckoning, and I have to rely on y'all for that part of it. But here's what I can offer you, which is, again, I don't know what it is, but hey, I'm really great at navigating the internal bureaucracy of this giant megacorp we all work for. So let me, I'm going to go focus on clearing the path for y'all. And if you're in a situation like that, then hopefully too, you can at least identify somebody on the team who's technically savvy enough to be able to kind of serve as your eyes for triangulating that side of it, where, if you got a blind spot there, then find somebody to help you fill it in. If you can't do it for yourself,
Yeah. I like your analogy of the coach and training, because if I'm looking at professional sports teams, the coach doesn't even try to also be the trainer. The coach just recognizes that every different position or skill set probably needs a different trainer. But either way, it's not the right answer to not have a trainer of any kind.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, hey, we could talk for quite a bit longer on this topic, but we're out of time. So I appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking about your experience managing developers. I know that some listeners out there have gotten a lot of value from it, and I'd encourage any listeners who are wishing that maybe your manager was listening to this, give them the episode, send them the link, let them know, hey, I listened to a programming podcast, but they just did a managing episode. You might be interested. So feel free to do that. But thanks, Glenn, for coming on the show and sharing your experience. I appreciate it.
Jeffrey, thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.